Hi everyone, welcome to another episode of Ancient Warfare Answers with me, Murray, your weekly fix of 10 minutes or more if I get ranting on ancient warfare related material to take you away from your everyday lives. You, of course, can ask us a question. You can send us a postcard. You can send me an email. You can comment on one of the other videos. You can even back us on Patreon. There's 3 different levels of support that you can give: $1, $5, and $1. $5 and $10. $1 gets you a support, thank you. $5 gets you a digital subscription to the magazine, and $10 gets you a physical copy of the magazine. And that they're named appropriately enough for an ancient warfare Patreon: Legionary, Optio, and Centurion. Now, the question today is, he says, trying to find one of the many Word documents, is from Mark. Did any of the friendly client states, Thrace, Cappadocia, Mauritania, etc., try to copy Roman legions in terms of equipment, organization, tactics, etc.? Excellent question. And I wonder, Mark doesn't mention it, but I do wonder if that's come from many of the war games involving Roman legions where you can find imitation Roman legions cropping up in your armies. Now, in that sense, there's all sorts of complicated things going on. Imitation meaning, did they look like Roman legionaries? And so did they fight in the same way? Did they have the same equipment? Were they organized the same way? And the evidence really isn't enough to tell us. Of course, the idea that the Roman legionary equipment is unique to the Roman legionaries, false anyway. The oval scutum is very similar to the oval shield of the Celts and the Gauls, as we saw when I talked about the Thurophoroi the other day, or probably a couple of weeks ago now. And you've also got the idea, of course, that chainmail armor came from the Celts and the Gauls as well, and the Romans adopted that. The idea, of course, that the gladius hispaniensis, the Spanish sword, is also something that's used widely. Of course, one of the things about the Roman legions is their ability to identify and adopt and then adapt various technologies in the scutum, the mail, and the sword technology. So what we've got is, across several sources, Plutarch, Polybius, a bit of Tacitus, is some quite nuanced descriptions of imitation legions. Now, the first one is under Antiochus IV, and Polybius tells us in Book 30 that when Antiochus had heard that Aemilius Paulus, the Roman general, was going to have a games celebrated in surpassing magnificence, he wanted to outdo him, and so he holds this parade. Now, the Daphne parade is famous, but a very brief sentence says that the procession at the Daphne parade was headed by 5,000 men in the prime of life, armed after the Roman fashion and wearing breastplates of chain armor. Next came 5,000 Mysians. So the first thing, and then the rest of the troops are then named in part of the Daphne parade. The funny thing about that is that they are armed in the Roman fashion, not organized, not fighting, not imitating the Romans, except in appearance. And the fascinating thing about that is that that seems to be to outdo the Romans at being Roman. 5,000 is interesting, of course, because that's roughly the size of a legion, slightly more. And, sure enough, after those, you get Mysians, then you get Cilicians, then light infantry wearing gold crowns. Next, 3,000 Thracians and 5,000 Gauls. And then comes the 20,000 Macedonians of the phalanx. So in a way, the procession of, because the phalanx would be the core and was the core of the Seleucid army. So the beginning of the parade, being the men who look like Roman soldiers, is very much about competing with Aemilius Paulus in the mid-2nd century BC. So that's not necessarily imitating them, and certainly wasn't intended to imitate them on the battlefield. And I don't think we ever see them being used by Antiochus on the battlefield. He uses his phalanx when that comes to the point. So I think in that regard, this is an imitation meant to out-Roman the Romans, but it's not an imitation in terms of copying tactics or anything, or organization. Maybe, obviously the weapons and armor look the same. They, of course, could be Thurophoroi themselves in terms of the fact that they had mail coats and oval shields. So We've then got Mithridates the sixth of Pontus, who uses Roman traitors to train his own units. According to Plutarch's Life of Lucullus, he tells us that on the enemy side, matters stood as follows. Mithridates, boastful and pompous at the outset, like most of the sophists, had first opposed the Romans with forces which were really unsubstantial, though brilliant and ostentatious to look upon. With this, he had made a ridiculous fiasco and learned a salutary lesson. When, therefore, he thought to go to war a second time, he organized his forces into a genuinely effective armament. He did away with barbarous hordes from every clime and all their discordant and threatening cries. He provided no more armor inlaid with gold and set with precious stones, for he saw that these made rich booty for the victors, but gave no strength whatever to their wearers. Instead, he had swords forged in the Roman fashion and heavy shields wielded. He collected horses that were well trained rather than richly caparisoned, and 120,000 footmen drilled in the Roman phalanx formation, 16,000 horsemen, not counting side-bearing four-horse chariots. Okay, so first thing is he has swords forged in the Roman fashion. Nothing there to say that they were going to be used in the Roman fashion, but Roman pattern swords, which the Romans had, of course, borrowed themselves from other institutions first. Then we're told, indeed, that he has 120,000 footmen drilled in the Roman phalanx formation, which, of course, is problematic. Roman phalanx formation is a bit of an oxymoron, but probably, therefore, that means that they are being drilled by Roman traitors training these 120,000, what's that, 30 legions. So that's, meant to wow and overwhelm the Romans as well. So it's interesting, of course, that idea of well-bejeweled armor not being effective. Caesar does the same thing. He forbids his soldiers from decorating their armor and shields because it's, not as good as a useful shield. So in that sense, Mithridates is imitating the Romans. He, of course, gets defeated by Lucullus, so a lot of good it did him. Now, the idea also of just using Roman weapons and Roman armor without using Roman tactics and Roman thought of war is interesting. You don't have that old idea of the three lines, of the standards having the same religious significance in these armies. They're copying the Roman appearance and even the Roman drill from the outside rather than from the inside out. The drill doesn't mean what it means to the Romans. The fighting in cohorts with standards doesn't mean what it means for the Romans. So in a way, a lot of these imitations are doomed to fail because they're not getting to grips with why are you imitating the Romans? Why have the Romans been successful? It's not just because of their armor and weapons. That is partially that. And they've adopted their own weapons and armors from others because they've seen how good they are. It's because of the combination of everything that's coming up. Right. Leaping forward, or leaping backwards, technically, I suppose, we've got a note from Polybius also that Hannibal's African troops were armed in the Roman fashion. Now, again, armed, not fighting, because according to Polybius in Book 3, Hannibal equipped those men with the choicest arms captured in the previous battles. The shields of the Spaniards and Celts were very similar, but their swords were entirely different. Those of the Spaniards thrusting with deadly effect as they cut, but the Gaulish swords being able to slash and requiring a long sleep to do so. So what you've got then is the adoption and plundering of Roman equipment from the dead. And that, of course, continues right through until the 4th century AD. We get the same story of the Goths in the 370s doing the same thing, that they are equipping themselves with Roman equipment, which kind of talks to the ubiquity of equipment. By that point in time, of course, the swords had changed to spatha, longer swords, but a spatha is a spatha, a sword is a sword, a shield is a shield, a metal coat is a metal coat. And so in many ways, arming yourself in that fashion, using a good sword or a good shield or a good piece of armor, isn't the same as imitation legionaries, even if they looked like imitation legionaries. So there's that. Now we leap forward to Julius Caesar, who also talks about the Gauls mimicking Roman arms and fighting style. And in a way, it's almost admiring the Gauls for imitating the Romans, but not recognizing that the Romans, even in Julius Caesar's time, have equipment and arms that mimicked the Gauls. So that idea, of the oval shield and the mail is very much, oh, look, they're doing what we're doing. No, no, we're doing what they did originally. Anyway, so you've got that idea, and you've also got this idea, where is it, in Caesar talking about, similar practice. But again, it's the same idea that they outwardly copy rather than inwardly copy. It looks like Roman legionaries, but it's not Roman legionaries. So we then jump to Tacitus's Annals and the Tacfarinas revolt in the reign of Tiberius, so AD 14 to 24, I think it is, who is a Numidian by birth, had served as an auxiliary in the Roman army, and then deserted, gathering around him a band, but he marshaled them like regular soldiers under standards and in troops. Now, the interesting thing there is that marshalling is described as in the Roman fashion, and in a way, Tacfarinas is more Romanized than any of those previous ones. The army was so divided that Tacfarinas kept the picked men who were armed in Roman fashion within a camp and familiarized them with the commander's authority, whilst his opponent had light troops with a fire. So the interesting thing there is seems to be some kind of imitation Roman procedure. The camp, for instance. We're not told of tactics to say this. They're armed in the Roman fashion, which makes them heavier armed infantry than your normal Numidian and North African soldiers. So they're tougher anyway. And, in a way, he's using them and familiarizing them with his command and with discipline. Now, of course, a Roman reader would read that to mean, well, it's Roman discipline and it's a Roman camp. But it may, again, simply be an external similarity, not an internal similarity. So, and as far as I'm aware, correct me if I'm wrong, please, in the comments, that's the evidence for imitation legionaries. So, in many ways, they're imitation in appearance only, rather than performance, certainly in performance, but even in operation. So they're armed like Roman soldiers, but they don't necessarily fight in the same style. And even when they do, such as with Mithradates, they're not as successful as the Romans are, because they're not fighting for the same causes and with the same sort of attitude, if you like. So I hope that answers your question. And thank you for asking it. And of course, join us again for another episode of Ancient Warfare Answers. Thanks very much. Bye.